Okay, so I'm going to be talking about something that has always been very complicated to understand and to explain to other people, which is the difference between sex and gender. Growing up, I had this idea that gender was only the two symbols that I would see on the bathroom door, which is the male and the female. And of course, this was something that was changed as I came to the university, where I realized that gender and sex were actually not interchangeable. So as I got exposed to more and more people, I began to ask myself, is there even really a difference between gender and sex? However, the question becomes even more complicated when I started searching for answers over the internet, as there is too much content but too little proper explanation. So as I continued to talk to people and I continued on my research, I encountered terms such as gender identity, sexual identity, biological sex. And in order to be able to understand this even more, I was able to conduct a survey asking for these specific terms. And I was able to interview 90 respondents, 45 biological males and 45 biological females. And of course, it's very important to note that there is a third sex, which is the intersex. However, we do not have that specific sample. We were able to get the gender identity and the sexual identity of different biological females and biological males, and these were the results that came up. There is actually a huge discrepancy between the gender identity and the sexual identity, meaning that these are not the same and that these do not necessarily coincide with one another. And from what we were able to deduce from all of this information, there is still very little understanding from society about the difference between gender identity and sexual identity. But this is also because gender roles are created by societies and they are not created by individuals, and we cannot keep thinking about gender as a bathroom door, because this constitutes a false dichotomy. There are so many different combinations of biological sex, gender identity, and sexual identity that we cannot simply categorize them into different sectors, as it would be more appropriate to explain it as a spectrum rather than a category. For example, there are people who are biologically male, their gender identity is male, however, they are asexual, or even people who are biologically female, their gender identity is female, but they are homosexual. So, when discussing gender and sex, it is easy to distinguish them between the inner sense or perception, which is the gender, or the biological characteristics, which is the biological sex of the person. There is also that third category, which is the sexual identity of a person, which is the physical, emotional, and mental attraction to another sex or gender in relation to your own. So gender is a continuum. As you can see here in the genderbread person, from it's pronounced metrosexual. We have so many different gender identities, so many different gender expressions, and these have their very specific definitions, but all of them are constituted into a spectrum. I was able to ask also the same respondents if they believe that they were born with the gender identity and the sexuality that they have. Surprise, surprise, not all of them know exactly how to answer that. So they actually aren't sure, although 25% of them said no, which is also a big chunk, but 13% of them believe that they were born with their gender identity and sexual identity. So sexuality is conducted on local stages, national stages, and international stages. And it is important to remember also that our views on sexuality would also highly depend on the culture that we associate ourselves with. So it's always very important that in order to understand sexuality, to be able to give mutual respect to everyone, we have to remember that the world is bigger and that we also have to start educating ourselves about these issues rather than simply going by society's standards. So the next time that you see someone and you're not entirely sure what to call them, remember, the sex does not determine the pronoun that one should use on a person, but rather their gender does. So this is an extremely simple explanation for something that doesn't have to be extremely complicated. Thank you so much for listening and have a good day.